Kimi to Koi no Tochuu. At the crossroads of fate, the sun was beginning to set, casting an orange hue over the quiet city street. A slight breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the sidewalk, carrying with it the promise of change. At the corner of the intersection, where the city's rhythm slowed just for a moment, two young people's paths crossed unexpectedly, setting in motion a series of events neither could have foreseen. Yuna was standing at the crosswalk, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had always prided herself on keeping her emotions hidden, wrapped tightly in the safe cocoon of her own reserve. But today was different. Her heart beat erratically, her chest tight with a mix of anticipation and dread. She had known for a while that something was shifting, something was about to break. She just hadn't expected it to happen like this. She glanced up and saw him, the boy from school, Haru. He wasn't just any boy. He was the one who had unknowingly wormed his way into her quiet world, making everything a little more complicated, a little less predictable. But what could she do? She had never asked for him to be here. Still, there was no escaping the way her pulse quickened whenever their eyes met. Haru, on the other hand, stood across the street, his eyes fixed on Yuna. A mixture of curiosity and uncertainty reflected in his gaze. He didn't understand it himself, this pull toward her, this unspoken connection that seemed to bind them together despite the walls she had carefully erected around herself. Haru had always been the more open of the two, wearing his heart on his sleeve, but even he knew that Yuna was different. She was an enigma. As their eyes locked, there was a fleeting moment of silence, the world around them fading into the background. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something close to it, a recognition that something was about to change, breaking down barriers. The next few days passed in a blur, but neither Haru nor Yuna could shake the lingering feeling that something had shifted between them. It wasn't anything obvious, no grand gesture or dramatic confrontation, but there was an unspoken understanding now, a tension that both tried to ignore, yet couldn't fully escape. At school, they would often catch each other's gaze from across the classroom, or feel the subtle weight of the other's presence in the hallway. Neither of them knew how to address it. Yuna remained aloof, her usual mask of indifference firmly in place, while Haru, despite his own reservations, found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, Haru found himself walking behind her on the way home, unsure of how he had ended up in such a position. He had originally intended to take a different route, but something had nudged him to follow her. Was it curiosity, or was it something deeper, something he couldn't quite name? He hesitated for a moment before deciding to speak up. "Yuna?" he called softly, and she froze, as if she had been expecting this. She turned slightly, her eyes narrowing. "What is it?" There was no malice in her voice, but it was clear she was guarded. That much Haru had learned in the brief time they had shared together. I've been meaning to ask you something," he stammered, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "We've been seeing each other around a lot, and I just thought, maybe we could talk, about things." Yuna's expression softened, but only slightly. "I'm not really the talking type," she replied, her tone unreadable. But there was something in her voice that told him she wasn't entirely rejecting the idea. "Why not? Everyone talks, don't they? I just thought, maybe it'd be easier if we weren't strangers anymore." Yuna stopped walking and turned to face him fully. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. There was something fragile in that silence, something raw. Finally, she let out a long breath and spoke again, her words quieter this time. I just don't know what I'm supposed to say," she admitted, her usual confidence slipping for a brief second. Haru nodded, his own uncertainties reflected in her confession. "I get it, but maybe that's the point of talking, to figure it out together." There was a pause before Yuna finally broke the silence, though her voice was almost a whisper. "Okay, maybe we can try, but don't expect me to make it easy." Haru smiled, feeling a flicker of something warm in his chest. "I don't need easy, just real." For the first time, Yuna's eyes softened. She didn't know what was happening between them, but she could no longer deny that there was something she hadn't felt in a long time, a connection. The walls she had so carefully built around herself were starting to crack. And though she was terrified of what might happen if they fell, a small part of her couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The weight of emotions. Their conversations became more frequent after that day, each one peeling back layers that neither of them had expected to reveal. Yuna still held back, her past and her fears too deeply embedded in her to trust someone so easily. But with Haru, there was something different. He didn't push her. He didn't demand anything of her. He simply listened, and that was more than she had ever allowed anyone to do. Yet, as their bond deepened, so did the complexity of their emotions. Yuna began to see sides of herself she hadn't acknowledged before. The vulnerability she had hidden for so long, the fear of being seen for who she truly was. She wasn't sure she could let go of the armor she had so carefully crafted, and the thought of being exposed terrified her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the quiet street, they found themselves sitting side by side on a park bench. The air was cool, the city's noises distant, leaving them in a strange silence. Yuna's fingers played nervously with the edge of her jacket sleeve, her gaze fixed on the ground. "You know," Haru began softly, breaking the silence, "I've always wondered why people are so afraid of letting others in. I mean, I get it, but it still feels weird. Like, why hold everything back?" Yuna didn't answer immediately, and for a moment, Haru wondered if he had said something wrong. But then she spoke, her voice low but steady. "It's easier that way," she said. "If you don't let people get too close, they can't hurt you. You don't have to rely on anyone, and no one can betray you." Haru's gaze softened. He understood what she meant, though it pained him to hear her say it. But what if you don't need to do it alone? What if there's someone who could make it a little easier? Yuna glanced at him, her expression unreadable. There was a fleeting vulnerability in her eyes that she quickly masked, but Haru had seen it. And for the first time, Yuna wasn't sure if she wanted to hide it anymore. Acceptance and embrace. The more time they spent together, the more Yuna realized that she was slowly letting her guard down. It wasn't all at once, and there were still moments when her walls would shoot back up without warning. But Haru was patient. More than patient, he was understanding. He never asked her to explain things she wasn't ready to, and he never judged her for the parts of herself she tried to keep hidden. As their relationship deepened, so did the challenges they faced. Friends, insecurities, and fears about the future all seemed to stand in their way. Yet, despite all the obstacles, they began to understand something that neither had fully realized before. Love wasn't something that could be forced or rushed. It was something that, when the time was right, would grow naturally. But first, they had to learn to accept not just each other, but themselves. One afternoon, as the autumn leaves began to fall, Haru turned to Yuna with a soft smile, his eyes filled with an emotion that was both gentle and unwavering. "You know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think I'm starting to understand." Yuna turned to him, the uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. But there was something else now too, something brighter, more hopeful. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she had a feeling she already knew. Haru reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. I'm starting to understand that I don't need to have all the answers. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay." For the first time, Yuna allowed herself to smile, a small but genuine smile that felt like the start of something new. Together, they would navigate this uncertain path, knowing that even if it wasn't easy, it was worth every step. Orange. Naho Takamiya wakes up on the last day of her summer break, feeling a slight sense of unease. The start of a new school year always brings a bit of anxiety, but today, her worry is deeper than usual. It's because of the letter she received, a letter written by her future self, from 10 years ahead. In it, she's given specific instructions on how to change certain moments in her life, moments that will alter the course of everything. At first, Naho is skeptical. The letter seems too bizarre to be real. How could it be from her future? But over the next few days, she starts to notice small, strange details that suggest the letter might actually be true. It describes her life and even events that haven't happened yet, urging her to make different choices. Her future self warns her that the decisions she makes now could change the fate of her classmate, Kusuk, and ultimately the lives of everyone she cares about. Kusuk, the boy she has quietly admired for some time, is the central figure in this letter. On the surface, Kusuk is just another classmate. Nothing particularly extraordinary about him. But as Naho reads the letter more carefully, she realizes that his future is intimately tied to hers. A future filled with sorrow, loss, and irreversible consequences. The letter tells her that if she doesn't take action, his life will be drastically different, and not in a good way. Naho becomes obsessed with this realization. She feels an overwhelming sense of responsibility, as if her every action could be the turning point in Kusuk's life. The letter lays out specific moments, seemingly insignificant at first glance, that will shape everything. Naho is urged to change her behavior, to act in ways that she wouldn't have considered otherwise. She starts paying closer attention to her surroundings, the people in her life, and the subtle shifts that could lead to disaster if left unchecked. The more she tries to alter the course of things, the more she realizes how fragile life can be. She can no longer approach her daily life with the same ease as before. There's a new weight to every decision, every word she speaks. And even with the knowledge that she's trying to change the future, Naho feels as though she's still struggling to hold onto control. Her relationship with Kusuk grows more complex as she becomes increasingly aware of his struggles. His life is not as simple as it seems, and Naho begins to understand that he is carrying burdens she couldn't have imagined. As the days pass, she feels a growing desire to protect him, to shield him from the pain she knows is coming. However, she's unsure whether she can truly change what's destined to happen. The letter also urges Naho to not just focus on Kusuk, but to consider her friends, too. Their lives, it seems, are intricately linked to Kusuk's future, and Naho can't ignore how her actions affect them all. But as she tries to steer things in a better direction, she finds herself caught in the push and pull between what's right and what's possible. Sometimes, her attempts to help seem to only make things more complicated. Despite the uncertainty and confusion, Naho becomes determined. She can't bear the thought of letting Kusuk suffer, and the weight of the responsibility becomes all-encompassing. She begins to realize that changing the future isn't just about knowing what will happen. It's about finding the courage to act differently and make choices that will rewrite the path ahead. But as she navigates this new, unpredictable journey, Naho begins to question whether she can truly alter the course of fate, or if some things are simply meant to happen. Naho continues her daily routine with the unsettling knowledge that her actions could impact Kusuk's life in ways she can't fully predict. The pressure of knowing what's coming weighs heavily on her. She's still trying to convince herself that the letter is real, but each decision she makes feels more and more like a gamble, where the stakes are higher than she ever imagined. As the school year begins, she struggles to keep her composure while secretly trying to follow the guidance her future self gave her. Her friends, who have always been a part of her life, are starting to notice something different about Naho. She's quieter, more thoughtful, more distant. They can see the change in her, but they don't understand why she's acting this way. They don't know about the letter, and Naho can't bring herself to explain it to them. How could she? How could she tell them that she's trying to prevent a tragedy from unfolding, when the truth seems so unbelievable? Despite her best efforts to act normally, there's a tension in the air, especially when it comes to Kusuk. He's always been kind to her, but there's a distance between them that Naho can't ignore. She starts to wonder if he's aware of her growing interest in him, or if he's just oblivious to her feelings. But she can't afford to focus on her own emotions right now. Every moment feels like a delicate balancing act, and the last thing she wants to do is make a mistake that could lead to irreversible consequences. Naho begins to follow the instructions from the letter more closely. The first big task is to reach out to Kusuk, to make sure he doesn't feel alone. The letter specifically says that he's going to face a period of intense loneliness, and Naho can't let that happen. She invites him to lunch, and though he seems surprised, he agrees. The conversation is awkward at first, but slowly, Kusuk begins to open up to her. Naho is struck by how vulnerable he seems, how different from the confident, aloof persona he often projects. It's clear that he's hiding something, But what? Naho's heart aches as she realizes how much pain he's carrying. As the days pass, Naho tries to stay close to Kusuk, to offer him the support he needs, but it's clear that something isn't right. Despite her efforts, he continues to struggle with his own inner demons. The more she gets to know him, the more she sees how deeply troubled he is, and how impossible it feels to truly help him. She's not sure if she's doing the right thing, but she can't stop herself from trying. Every time she feels like she's making progress, something new comes up. Another obstacle, another problem that she wasn't prepared for. The letter from her future self keeps guiding her, but it's not always easy to follow. Naho often finds herself second-guessing her actions, wondering if she's doing enough. The letter is clear in its message. Time is running out, but no matter how hard she tries, she can't seem to make the difference she wants to. It feels like a constant race against time, and every moment of hesitation could lead to disaster. One afternoon, as Naho sits in the schoolyard, watching Kusuk from a distance, she's hit with a realization. He's not just dealing with loneliness. There's something darker at play, something far more painful than she initially thought. Naho wonders if her future self knew about this pain all along, or if she's only just now beginning to understand the depth of it. Kusuk's tragic future, which Naho is desperately trying to avoid, becomes more real with every passing day. The weight of it bears down on her, but she continues to move forward, even as the uncertainty of her choices haunts her. Every time she thinks she might be making progress, another challenge appears, reminding her how fragile her efforts are. The more Naho tries to help Kusuk, the more she begins to realize that she might not have the power to change everything after all. Still, she refuses to give up. There's a fire inside her now, a determination that drives her forward. She knows that if she doesn't try, if she doesn't act, Kusuk's future will be sealed. But the pressure of it all is beginning to take its toll. Naho feels herself growing exhausted, emotionally drained. She's torn between trying to protect Kusuk and preserving her own sanity. How long can she keep this up? How much more can she bear? Naho's friends continue to support her, but they can sense that something is wrong. They don't know what's going on, but they see the signs. She's no longer the carefree girl she once was. The weight of the future is too much for her to carry alone, and Naho starts to realize that maybe, just maybe, she doesn't have to carry it by herself. But even with the support of those around her, the question still remains. Can she truly change the future, or is she just fighting against fate? As Naho continues to try and reshape the course of events, she becomes increasingly aware of how difficult it is to control the flow of life. No matter how carefully she follows the instructions in the letter from her future self, there are forces at play that are far beyond her control. Each day feels like a new challenge, and the weight of the responsibility to save Kusuk's future presses heavily on her heart. Despite her best efforts to intervene, things with Kusuk are still not going as she had hoped. He seems to be getting more distant with each passing day. Though she's tried to be there for him, to offer him comfort and companionship, it feels like she's losing him bit by bit. He doesn't confide in her the way she wishes he would, and he continues to carry the heavy burden of whatever troubles him in silence. Naho can only guess at the depths of his pain, and it frustrates her that she can't do more to help him. The more she tries to understand Kusuk, the more she feels like there's a part of him that she'll never be able to reach. His internal struggles remain a mystery, and that makes Naho feel powerless. She can't protect him from everything, no matter how hard she tries. As time goes on, she finds herself questioning if she's truly making any difference at all. Kusuk's friends, especially Suwa, begin to notice how concerned Naho is about him. They all know that Kusuk has been through a lot in his life, but they don't understand the full extent of his pain. Suwa, ever the supportive friend, reassures Naho that Kusuk is a resilient person, someone who will be able to handle whatever comes his way. But Naho isn't so sure. Every time she sees the emptiness in Kusuk's eyes, it's like a warning bell ringing in her mind, telling her that things are much worse than anyone realizes. Naho knows that her actions are having an impact on the group of friends. They've all begun to notice the changes in her, though they don't know the true reason behind them. She's distant, distracted, and far more serious than she's ever been before. It's not just Kusuk who is occupying her thoughts now. It's the possibility of losing him, of seeing him suffer in ways that she can't even imagine. The weight of the future she's trying to change is constantly on her mind, and it's beginning to affect the way she interacts with everyone around her. Despite the strain of her internal conflict, Naho pushes on. She continues to try to bring Kusuk into her world, to make him feel less alone, even though it seems like he's slipping away. One day, after a particularly difficult encounter, Naho receives a new letter from her future self. It's short, but it carries an urgency that sends a chill down her spine. The letter confirms that her actions are indeed making a difference, but it also warns her that time is running out. There's a crucial moment ahead, a turning point that will decide Kusuk's fate, and she must act before it's too late. This new letter gives Naho a sense of purpose, but it also heightens the pressure she feels. The future isn't as malleable as she hoped, and she realizes that no matter how much she tries to change things, there are forces in play that she can't control. The fragile nature of the future becomes more apparent to her with each passing day, and she starts to wonder if it's too late to make a difference. In the meantime, Kusuk continues to retreat into himself. His friends, though well-meaning, don't know how to break through his shell. Even Suwa, who has always been there for him, seems to be at a loss. Naho begins to realize that she can't do this alone. She needs to involve others, especially Suwa, if she's going to help Kusuk in any meaningful way. She confides in him about her concerns, though she doesn't reveal the full extent of the letters and the future she's trying to change. Suwa listens with concern, offering his own support, but Naho can sense that he's frustrated too. He doesn't know the whole story, and that makes him feel powerless in the face of Kusuk's struggles. Naho starts to feel torn between her duty to help Kusuk and her growing connection with Suwa. She's always appreciated Suwa's kindness and loyalty, but now she feels a deeper pull toward him. Suwa's unwavering support and gentle nature have always been a source of comfort for her, but she knows that her feelings for him could complicate everything. There's a part of her that wants to confide in him fully, to tell him everything about the letters and the responsibility she's been shouldering. But she's afraid that the truth will be too much for him to handle. The complexity of Naho's emotions grows as she navigates the tangled web of her feelings for Kusuk, Suwa, and her own sense of responsibility. She can't ignore the attraction she feels towards Suwa, and she can't deny the growing bond she shares with him. But at the same time, she knows that Kusuk's future is on the line, and she can't allow herself to become distracted. She must stay focused on the goal, to change the future, to save Kusuk from the heartbreak and loss that awaits him. But as Naho continues to struggle with her conflicting emotions, she begins to question whether she's truly capable of changing the future. The letter from her future self keeps urging her forward, but Naho starts to feel as though she's running out of time. She's unsure if she's doing enough, or if she's just fighting against forces that are beyond her control. The days continue to slip by, and Naho feels as though she's living in a constant state of tension. The weight of Kusuk's future, and her role in shaping it, never leaves her. She tries to focus on the present, to be there for her friends and for Kusuk, but the future keeps calling to her. She can't escape the knowledge of what's to come, the future that's hanging by a thread. Despite all her efforts, she feels like she's running in circles, unable to move forward with certainty. The pressure of it all begins to feel unbearable. One afternoon, as Naho sits on a bench in the schoolyard, she catches a glimpse of Kusuk across the field. He looks more distant than ever, as if he's become a shadow of the person she once admired. The letter had warned her that he would fall into a deep isolation, but seeing it in front of her, in real time, is even harder to bear than she anticipated. Naho feels the urgency rising within her. Time is slipping away, and she's not sure what to do anymore. Every time she thinks she's getting closer to him, he pulls further away. In a desperate attempt to break through the wall Kusuk has built around himself, Naho decides to confront him directly. She knows it's a risky move, but she can't keep waiting in the shadows. The future, the letters, everything, it's all been building to this moment. If she doesn't act now, she fears that it will be too late. Her heart races as she approaches him, her mind filled with the weight of everything she's tried to do. Kusuk looks up as she reaches him, and for the first time in a long while, she sees something in his eyes. Not the detached, distant look she's grown accustomed to, but a flicker of something deeper. He's surprised by her approach, but there's a quiet sadness in his gaze, a vulnerability that Naho hasn't seen before. Her heart aches as she realizes just how much pain he's been carrying all this time. "Why have you been so distant?" Naho asks softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I know something's been bothering you. You don't have to go through this alone." Kusuk looks at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he finally speaks, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to burden anyone with my problems. It's better to keep everything to myself." Naho's heart breaks at his words. She understands the impulse, the desire to protect others from the pain inside. But she also knows that no one can carry their burdens alone forever. She takes a deep breath, trying to summon the courage to speak what's been on her heart for so long. "You don't have to bear it alone," she says, her voice steady now. "We're all here for you. I'm here for you." For a moment, there's silence between them. Then, to Naho's surprise, Kusuk finally nods, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It's not much, but it's enough. It's a sign that he's beginning to let down his guard. Just a little. The wall he's built around himself is starting to crack, and for the first time, Naho feels a glimmer of hope. But even as she feels that small victory, she knows that the hardest part is still ahead. The letter had warned her that Kusuk would face a moment of great despair, one that could push him over the edge. No matter how much she wants to protect him, she knows that she can't control everything. There are some things that are out of her hands. But in this moment, Naho makes a promise to herself. She will do everything she can to be there for him, to be a source of support, no matter what happens. In the weeks that follow, Naho's connection with Kusuk continues to grow. They spend more time together, and with each passing day, Naho sees him become a little less distant, a little more open. It's not an easy process. There are still moments of silence, still times when Kusuk pulls away, but Naho refuses to give up on him. She's learned that sometimes the smallest gestures of kindness and understanding can make all the difference. As the school year progresses, Naho and her friends begin to notice changes in Kusuk. He's still struggling, but he's not alone anymore. And that, in itself, is a victory. Naho can't know what the future holds, but she's starting to understand that she doesn't have to carry the weight of it all alone. She has her friends, and she has Kusuk, and together, they can face whatever challenges come their way. One day, as Naho looks back on everything that's happened, she realizes that the future isn't something to be feared. It's something to be lived, one moment at a time. The letters from her future self have guided her, but they haven't dictated her every move. In the end, it was her choices, her actions, and the love and support of those around her that truly shaped the future. The tragedy she feared might still be a part of their lives, but it doesn't define them. And as she walks forward into the unknown, Naho knows that no matter what happens, she's done her best to protect the ones she loves. Kusuk, though still struggling with his past, is no longer the person he was when Naho first met him. And as he walks beside her, Naho feels a quiet peace settle within her heart. The future may be uncertain, but one thing is for sure. They are not alone, and they will face whatever comes together.